So here is a direct quote from Kevin Shavinsky, who is a former Yale astrophysicist who also taught at the ETH University in Zurich. Now he runs an AI startup in Zurich. Here comes the quote. How many people are still going to be programming by hand in a year? 5? 10? And keep in mind, this is a guy whose business is pretty much getting disrupted by OpenAI, so he has no incentive to be this bullish. He has no incentive to hype this. It's just his honest, in my opinion, highly qualified opinion. Startups are going to get weird, man. And I was just getting pitched some early to mid-stage startups this morning, and I was looking at their extremely replaceable products, essentially the Uber of insert whatever here. And I'm like, okay, the business case kind of makes sense, but that's assuming that for the foreseeable future, it still takes 20 guys and a few tens of millions of dollars to make an app. What if it takes one guy in an afternoon? Startups are going to get weird, man. But we're going to see so much more innovation. There is going to be almost zero barriers. This is exciting. And with essentially no barriers to entry and much lower risk, it's going to be much harder for the Uber of whatever to corner the market in their respective whatever, because there will be much more competition, more challengers. So even as the marginal cost of a software startup drops to essentially zero, the rate of innovation and of, let's say, the rate of mutation will go through the roof, because people will just try everything. It costs nothing. And another thing that will go through the roof will be competition. So for each radical new startup, you will have imitators and contenders immediately. This is going to lead to some very interesting dynamics, as I think one of the effects will be that it will be much more difficult for startups to have overtly predatory, socially destructive business models. Fun times ahead. Startups are going to get weird, man. And the implications are also far from fully realized for the social status of startups and being associated with startups, or of being a programmer. It's like, oh, you have a startup, very impressive, bro. Everybody has a startup. I made 5 startups last weekend. It's a very different situation. It's no longer this exclusive, high barriers to entry, you need special skills, basically Steve Jobs kind of deal. Now it's going to be everybody. Suburban moms will be making startups on lazy afternoons, sipping their Chardonnay. Tectonic shift. Which is exciting, because when you get completely new kinds of people being able to essentially be software startups, you will get radically new kinds of products. You will simply get different ideas than you get from, okay, let's just say that the tech people are a specific demographic. With, okay, there are differences. You have a guy from Bangladesh, but like culturally, it's not so representative. And once you have suburban moms, actual farmers in Bangladesh, scuba divers in Norway, suddenly being able to make an app in an afternoon, again, we're going to see an explosion in the rate of innovation and in the breadth of ideas that will be explored and built. Startups are going to get so weird, man. I love it. Completely love it.
Sorry for joining the conversation late. I agree that the democratization of apps will continue, but remember, the web made it a lot easier to build web pages too. So then the bar went up. So then you needed interactive web pages. So a lot more people learned how to build interactive web pages. So the bar went up. So people built apps. And a lot of people learned how to build basic apps. So the bar went up. So now people build very sophisticated apps. So yes, there will be much more long tail capability to build simple software. And this will have a huge impact, especially in the enterprise where they just have a hard time hiring programmers. But that said, at least on the consumer side, on the mass consumption side, all this will do is raise the bar. It just means that the apps a year from now, 2 years from now, are going to look absolutely freaking amazing compared to the apps today. So what you call an app today, you won't even take 2 looks at and want to use 2 years from now. Put another way, programmers are not these magical elves who have learned this secret esoteric ritual which nobody else can learn and understand. Programmers are simply the people who are so dedicated to building software that they're willing to stay at the edge of the craft and learn and use every tool, no matter how sophisticated or complex it is. Today's programmer uses a different set of tools and languages, as will tomorrow's. So tomorrow's programmer will be doing natural language programming, but they will be every bit as dedicated, skilled, intense, and applying effort as in the past. So I still don't think that high-end computing gets democratized. Here is the key difference. The key difference is that when you program something, software can go to 1 billion users and it's the same software. So people always just demand the best, as opposed to where if we're digging ditches and now we all get bulldozers, it is truly democratized because, one ditch is not better than the others, and building more ditches still takes more effort. So because programming is winner take all within a given domain, the specialist programmer will continue to dominate over the generalist who's just telling the computer to write the code.
These are 2 really great points, and I think they kind of point towards a general trend in human history, where it's like, yes, the bar is always being raised, but that's actually a very good thing, both for the companies that are being made by the people who are in industry and that are like the small percentage of society that are programmers, but it's also really great for the people who are using things that get so democratized and so easy that it's trivial for anyone to do. It's like, back in the day, it would be really difficult for a mathematician to do something that now everybody can do, but being great is not about just what you do, but it's when you can do it. Technology and abstractions are very related. I think there's kind of a spectrum between them, and they both have this ability to allow humanity to move past something. It's like moving up the hierarchy of needs. Once you trivialize one layer, you actually free yourself up to focus on the next layer. And so it's really great both to be able to trivialize what we have been doing recently, but also to unlock us the free time to do something new.
And as the bar goes up, naturally the development frontier for these sophisticated tools, which the language models are, will be to meet the users more than halfway and to be able to construct more sophisticated interfaces and products from simple prompts, which I think we already see happening in the sort of larval stage. So the ideal large language model is sort of like the reverse of the genie from the classic fairy tales, where you typically get exactly what you asked for, but something else than you meant. And a well-designed language model will give you exactly what you mean, no matter how clumsily and crudely you phrase it. So, yes, the competitive edge will be in having a nicer app than the next guy, but then logically the AI models will compete in being able to provide a higher quality of output for the same prompt or the same input. So I don't think that will actually matter from the user side. Like, this will be the value that they are providing to you. That it does what you mean and does it very elegantly.
Yes, yes. I love the way that you're phrasing this. This is exactly what I've been spending all of my time working on and thinking about recently. I've been using terms like intent translation or like a reasoning engine or natural language virtual machine. But your analogy of kind of inverting that classic trope of the genie in the bottle, that is the perfect way to put it. This is fundamentally about seeing underneath what the user explicitly said, what they're asking for within the constraints of the system, not trying to figure out exactly what they said. There are so many fascinating ideas here packed into what you've been talking about today, Cyber Owl. So many different axes upon which people are going to build. To your point, like this kind of split in technology, it's going to allow developers who don't want to think about AI to compete on having the nicest app, having the nicest backend, the nicest abstractions on a systemic level. And then there's this parallel axis for competition on reasoning. And, you know, me personally, I think this goes beyond AI models. I think this requires a meta framework above the level of an LM model. But you're absolutely right that that is one of the markets here that's going to be split off from this new technology. There's going to be a market for who provides the best reasoning, and there's going to be common interfaces for consuming that, and then developers all around the world are going to be able to integrate that into an app that they build. You know, a year from now, it's going to be trivial to add your own custom Siri in any app in a weekend. When people working on any sort of app, not just AI, but outside of AI, start to shift their focus in terms of what they're building on a very core level, in terms of the most fundamental building blocks of, say, your backend and how it all pieces itself together, to something that's more modular, more akin to the Unix style philosophy, you know, text is universal interface. That kind of thinking allows you to compose with an AI reasoning agent automatically, instead of having to ask a user to figure out how to use your application. Application developers, you're not going to have to think about what type of a dashboard you need to put together for your SaaS, and like, oh, maybe my customers want this view with this chart and this information, I'm going to pull it in this particular way, and then you orchestrate a bunch of different SQL queries and all these data mutations, and you're building out these pages over and over and over again and having human engineers paid tons of money to modify them. Instead, you just build the building blocks once. How do I do the most basic operations, finding, interacting with my data, and then reasoning becomes commoditized through AI, and reasoning just plugs into modular UI in your app and allows the user to do whatever they want on the fly. I like to think of this analogy like back in the early days of web development, you know, you had to run your own server, or at the very least you were managing like an Apache server that you got through a service provider. And so everybody building websites had to worry so much about the fundamentals that we couldn't build the types of crazy websites that everybody built in the last 10 years. Because we had now things like AWS, and then things even built on top of that, like Vercel for deployments, like PlanetScale for databases. And I think what we're going to see right now is like we're still in those early days with LLMs and how people build on those. So people are spending so much time, application developers, where, you know, they don't really want to build an AI app. They just want to build something that's domain specific, but that has amazing AI features. We still need to see what that provider level, what that commoditized basic infrastructure level is going to look like. There's going to be a whole new set of cloud services that are built on AI, not just fundamental AI tech like LLMs, but all sorts of specific applications of LLMs as a meta level above that. once this ecosystem is established, what you're going to see is all of the people right now who aren't in this AI hype wave yet, the people that are still obsessed and focused with whatever magical niche thing they're building in some completely separate domain, they're going to now be able to pull in the benefits of AI without having to go all in on like, I'm going to build AI. There are so many second and third level automations and second and third level pieces of infrastructure that are going to be built on top of LLMs, on top of AI voice transcription, on top of video generation and image generation and image classification, that people aren't even considering how powerful of a shift this is going to be for everybody building and everybody using apps, because people are still just thinking about like the implications of directly GitHub Copilot and stuff like that. They're not thinking about the implications of when somebody builds another layer on top of that the entire programming industry is going to adopt. You don't even know what that's going to do. A year from now, a junior developer is going to be able to spin up in a single weekend, a note-taking app that the user can talk to in English, in Japanese, in Chinese, Afrikaans, French, 50, 100 different languages, and it knows exactly what the user wants to do. It can take notes for them from what they're saying, but it can also take actions, and they can even type with broken English and make all sorts of grammatic mistakes, and it will know exactly what they want. These capabilities, which a year ago seemed impossible and would take hundreds of engineers, months to build, they're going to be as trivial as it is to spin something up on AWS, where, in the same sense, it would be impossible before the current cloud infrastructure existed for you to actually build all of that in its full sophistication and in how robust it is. You couldn't do that by yourself, and now it's trivial. It's just done for you in 5 minutes. And the same exact thing is going to happen with all of these AI capabilities, with understanding what the user wants and with figuring out how to orchestrate all of the different basic actions in a system and accomplish that. Looping back to Naval's point about raising the bar, what's going to happen once this burst of AI capabilities kind of levels out over the next 2-5 years is so many of the things that we've been doing for the past 10 years, building applications, we're going to realize that they're not necessary and that they are trivialized now. And, we thought we had to do them, and now it turns out we don't, and we can have a much better version that's done automatically. And the net result of that is we're going to see so much space open up that we didn't even realize was there in terms of what we can do over the next 10 years and the next 10 years after that. In the same sense that, you don't have to write your own templating engine anymore because you can use React, and you don't have to run your own web server anymore because you can just deploy to any of the platforms as a service that are out there. You won't have to build your own search anymore. You won't have to build your own menus. You won't have to build necessarily even your own GUIs. You won't have to figure out what pages you want your app to have. You just have to figure out what your app is, what value it does for the user, and AI will take care of so many things that we thought were necessary 12 months ago.
I agree with you, John. The level of abstraction that AI allows us now is just absurd. I find myself doing more and more just because so many tedious aspects, the friction of getting started, are pretty much have effectively been eliminated overnight. I also find models like GPT-4 have more or less brought people they've nearly turned everybody into a programmer overnight. Doesn't mean they're like a 10x programmer, but at the very least, everyone, as far as I can tell, in the world has gone from 0 to 1. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to build a better business than the specialist programmer right now. But one thing that I find so fascinating is if you examine high-performing athletes, you'll find there's a lot of diminishing returns at the tail ends of the distribution, where other skills begin to play a more important role in distinguishing them from their competitors. And there's like a deep mathematical principle at play there. But basically, it just means that above average abilities are much more common than having multiple great abilities and being average on the rest. So basically, it's rare to find like multiple Elon Musks in the world. And so it makes me wonder about the future of these large language models and how people use them. In a world, let's say 10 years from now, where the GPT-X has come out and everybody's more or less at the 99th percentile for coding, I'd imagine other skills would start to become more relevant, like you see in so many other domains. And it makes me wonder, at what point will the programming novice with experience in other fields, like an academic, a journalist, a chef, a molecular biologist, have an edge over the single-track specialist programmer because they possess multiple above-average skills and understand their business well? On the other hand, I'm not even sure that day will come because maybe by then GPTX will be capable of doing what the molecular biologist and the programmer can do. And then we'd be faced with an entirely different set of questions to answer. But it does get me pondering sometimes about what the future will look like.
I think it depends entirely on what kind of software product you're creating. If you're creating a custom product for your own use or for your company's use or for a narrow use, then yes, these tools will eventually turn everybody into programmers, and it will just be your skill in the other domains and your design sense and your taste and your understanding of the problem field that will drive the quality of the solution. It will no longer be a barrier to coding, and in that sense, yes, everybody will be a coder. However, if you are creating an app that is a winner take all, like say a social network, a search engine, a GPT bot itself, or any app where people just want to use the best one and everyone has access to the same software, then it is still going to be a winner take all situation. And in that case, you need the John Carmacks of the world, you need the Notches of the world, you need the Hal Finneys of the world, the people who can extract everything out of the bare metal, who understand the system, the network, the hardware, the bandwidth, everything up and down, that are true artisans that can code the whole thing up and understand it inside out, and they will use a GPT bot to 10x even more. So I think the best apps, the mass market apps, the most widely used apps will actually still be built by specialists who are operating at the edge of their ability and the edge of the field's ability. However, the generic apps will be built by everybody. An analogy might be how Excel models are built by everybody. Financial analysts and planners all over the world use Excel, and people use Excel for things that it was never designed to, and it works pretty well because of VBA macros and just a spreadsheet simple programming model. However, Excel itself had to be built by Microsoft.
I agree completely with Naval here. As with everything, there are a lot of Pareto distributions that show up in software. As humans, we are more alike than we are different for the most part. We all eat, we all sleep, and we all have fairly similar aspirations and goals. So because of this, there is a very thin and tall spike of software that runs trillions or quadrillions or more times. And there's a very long tail of software that runs very few times, if at all. Because of this, the software that is common, that is ran very often, divides by a much larger base the cost of writing it, and multiplies by a much larger factor the benefits of efficiency, the benefits of leverage. So it's always going to be people at the forefront of the field that are pulling us forward with human genius, essentially, as long as we're in this paradigm that LLMs introduce, where we can go sideways and down, but we can't really go up with just the AI. We still need humans to go up. Something kind of beautiful about these distributions that almost look like an inverse function is that they are essentially symmetric along the 45-degree line, y equals x. What I mean by that is the long tail is essentially a reflection of the tall spike. The tall spike might be very valuable, but it's not very wide because there's not a lot of code there. The long tail might not be very valuable per unit of code, but in aggregate, it is very valuable. You could take this as almost an antidote to the fear that human programmers will be replaced by AI. Because if you think about it, it never really made sense for the long tail to be programmed by humans manually anyways. Because for each unit of code written, the value is so much less. It is hard to justify or impossible to justify the effort it would take to write the long tail of code that could be used, that could be wanted, that could be valued. And so it seems to me, due to the characteristics qualitatively of the current paradigm in AI, where LLMs seem to go sideways and down in the sense that they can analogize existing knowledge and do new things with existing knowledge, but not really create anything truly novel or genius. It seems that humans will continue to do the coding that they like to do and that they should be doing in the first place, which is the tall spike, but the long tail can now be increasingly handled by AI, which helps everybody and doesn't really hurt anybody. In other words, rather than being replaced, human programmers are now receiving a equally valuable complementary reflection to themselves in an arena that was never perfect for them in the first place, which is kind of beautiful. Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think it's very true that most of the people who end up working on the tall spikes, whether it's AI or crypto or any field, start out somewhere on the long tail. It's very hard to just jump into a field and immediately be operating at the frontier. People kind of have to start with something smaller, a little bit less novel, a little bit more manageable. So I think one of the interesting optimistic mindsets that you can pull from the recent developments in LLMs when applied to programming is in life, a lot of interesting innovations arise at the intersection of multiple complicated fields. In past, programming is so inaccessible in a sense that somebody who's an expert in biology or an expert in geology or whatever other science might be scared to even get involved. But with how accessible LLMs are making programming, I think it's conceivable that a lot more people who work in different fields are going to be able to pick up programming, do something simple at first, get really good, and then achieve some really interesting stuff at the intersection of software and their actual field.
It's not a criticism of the analogy at all, but I would point out so it's not really a long tail until you have that big spike, and the relative strength of the spike versus the tail, that's what makes it a long tail. Like if the spike wasn't so big, it'd be Gaussian, right? So it's an interesting fact that, of course, with big successes, it always looks like there's a crazy long tail, and that actually might be true. But there's a counter argument that says if people work on things for a long time and then one person really solves it, they immediately make everyone else look like, instead of a random distribution, like everyone's at the same level, like a long tail. Like there's just the spike and then, does that make sense? Just the mathematical understanding of it. It's not until the spike comes in that there is a long tail. So think of it like grading, right? Like, let's say you have 99 students, and they all score between 68 and 75 on the exam. So that's it's not even a normal distribution. It's like a random distribution, right? They're all in there. Now, one student comes along and scores 100, right? So now that one student, all of a sudden, the entire distribution changes. Instead of looking like random noise down at the floor, it looks like a long tail. Make sense?